because it has this big secret. Anybody who lives there is not allowed to leave. There are a few men, only men, who are allowed to leave and become traders. But
I was waiting for you to make that adjustment. Welcome to the Skiffy and Fantasy Show's Mining the Genre Asteroid. This is episode number 4 of a show where older, overlooked genre gems are dug up and discussed anew, sometimes deconstructed, possibly even destructed entirely by nuclear weapons.
I know now what lies across the land, the slow and heavy weight. They call it faith, but it is not faith. It is fear.
Deep quote there.
Well, I'm Sean.
I'm Trish.
And I'm Paul, who originally created the Mining the Genre Asteroid concept for Skiffy and Fantasy.
That's right. Did that get left out of, the opening bit?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to the Skiffy and Fantasy Show's Mining the Genre Asteroid, based on the column by the multi-Hugo Award winner, Paul Weber.
There we are.
Where we pick older, overlooked gems and discuss them anew on this show. There you go.
We'll blame
Paul?
We'll blame the scriptwriter for this one.
Yes. How dare you, Daniel, you bastard. We love Daniel. You're very cute, Daniel.
We do love Daniel. Should I do the tagline again?
No, we're fine. We're just fixing it. Today's show, we're going to discuss 1955's The Long Tomorrow by Leigh Brackett.
Before we get into that discussion, a reminder to our listeners, please share your questions and comments with us about the show via social media or at skiffyandfantasy.com/listener suggestions. They might get discussed right here on future shows. You could suggest a Mining the Genre Asteroid book, for example. If you aren't already, and those who are listening to this right now are, join us on Twitch for Sean's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Time to be part of our interactive live streaming format. Exciting. Finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be part of our special Patreon-only events on Discord. It only takes $1 a month.
Also, please tell folks about this show and review us on iTunes, Podchaser, Good Pods, and more. Word of mouth is a big deal for fan-run podcasts, and we need your help to find new ears for this ridiculous show.
It is ridiculous. So, Trish, in the script it says that you're now responsible for telling us what The Long Tomorrow is about. And so, I gift it to you. What is this book about?
Okay, this is about a society. A couple of generations ago, all the large cities in America were destroyed with atomic bombs, and only those who followed, or converted to, a simpler, rural way of life survived. Now, most technologies and luxuries are forbidden. Towns and buildings are limited in size by the 30th Amendment. In our story, teenagers Lynn and Esau watch a man get stoned to death for allegedly wanting to bring cities back. They steal his radio, get caught, and run away. They stay for a while at a river settlement, but trouble comes there, too. A trader named Hostetter takes them, and Esau's new wife, Amity, to the legendary town of Barterstown, which seems normal on the surface but hides an underground facility where they are trying to get an electronic brain to create a shield that prevents the splitting of atoms, in case technology ever comes back. A disillusioned Lynn and his new wife Joan run away, but he is convinced to return with her. The end?
Excellent.
The end.
Yeah. So I was holding up, I know it's all reversed and weird and everything, but I had my Library of America editions edited by Gary K. Wolfe, which happens to have this story in it. And so that's what I've been reading from. It has other things in here too, but those might be for another day, possibly.
Maybe. What's the other things? What's the other things in it, Sean?
Well, in this book, the set comes with 2. This one also has The Space Merchants by Frederick Pohl and C.M. Kornbluth, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, which I haven't actually heard a lot of people talk about in a very long time.
Yeah,
and The Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson, which is a curious, interesting choice. So
More Than Human.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, this is the 1950s sets. So it's like, I can't remember what the other volume covers, but it's approximately the same rough era. So it's a very interesting and a set of books, and also like just pretty, because the Library of America editions are just they're all on my wish list. They're very nice. But it was really interesting to read in this particular volume because if I wanted the first edition of this actual book, I was going to pay a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not rich. I'm a teacher, guys.
It's not necessary to get a first edition to enjoy this fine volume. In fact, you can buy a pretty good compilation on, as an ebook of her other stories too. There's also Gallant's edition, which is pretty nice, and a couple of other interesting editions floating around. It's accessible. It's really what you can get it at a reasonable rate.
I've done some Mining the Genre Asteroid stuff where you just can't find the book to save your life. I just happen to have a copy, but this one is readily accessible. But it's not one that's talked about that often. Therefore, it falls under my remit, and that's why we're talking about it tonight.
Well, I was curious about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Even though it was a finalist for the Hugo Award in 1956. Published in 1955, it was up against Call Him Dead by Eric Frank Russell, The End of Eternity by Isaac Asimov, Not This August by Cyril Kornbluth, and the winner, Double Star by Robert A. Heinlein. Which is a fun story. It's an entertaining book. I would have voted for Leigh Brackett's book over this were I voting that year.
I've not read the other stuff. It's always interesting when you poke back in time and look at like this thing won or this thing was nominated and like what was the winner or what was the ballot like that year.
What the winner should have been. Our friend Jo Walton has done columns on that, where she's delved in. It's like, well, no, why did the voters not vote for this? Because this book is clearly more influential and more lasting.
Rainbow Warrior's asking in chat, is this the first Hugo novel finalist written by a woman?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Yes.
It is?
Yes, it is. I'm pretty sure. That was in the Wikipedia. Yes, in 1956, her book The Long Tomorrow made her the first woman ever shortlisted for the Hugo for Best Novel.
Wow.
And, along with C.L. Moore, one of the first 2 women ever nominated for a Hugo Award.
Yeah.
There we go.
Is C.L. Moore for Judgment Night, maybe? I don't know. You don't need to look that up. It's fine. But since we're talking history, I know that one of the notes in here is about Brackett's history, and I will cede this ground by just making a general statement for anyone who's not familiar with Brackett. She's probably less known for The Long Tomorrow than probably for Scaife, and then depending on your corner of fandom, for her work on Empire Strikes Back, which may not be entirely fair that that's the thing she's most known for in certain corners, but Star Wars fans are weird. So but her history in the genre, I'm guessing you guys will have even more to say than I would say. I feel like has an outsized impact that isn't necessarily always discussed, or as much as it should be, perhaps.
Well, she was known as the Queen of Space Opera. She started writing, I think, in the 1940s, and I think one of the other books of hers that we considered reading was... hang on. Tabs. Sorry. Oh, dear. It was about a Martian... a revolution on Mars. Right.
Yeah. That was the
No,
other one
not Black Amazon of Mars.
No?
That was definitely one of her famous ones.
But
That was one of her Eric John Stark novels. But
it might have been one of her Mars books, maybe Shadow Over Mars or something.
Shadow Over Mars. Yes, that was a awful corporation ruled everything on Mars, and people eventually rebelled. So pretty. She was disruptive even back then, I guess. But yeah, she was very much known for her planetary romances, Queen of the Martian Catacombs, other Eric John Stark books. She also, as you said, worked on the screenplay for The Empire Strikes Back, and although it got totally rewritten, a lot of her original story beats were there in the final product. And she took some time off in the middle of her career and just did regular screenwriting for Hollywood. She worked on a fair number of mysteries, and she also wrote for some westerns, including Rio Bravo and El Dorado and other things like that. So she has a long and fairly illustrious writing career, but a lot of people now just don't know about her, and so that's why we are revisiting her work.
Yeah.
Yep, I had not read. I've read plenty of her planetary romance stuff, and of course I've watched Empire Strikes Back. But The Long Tomorrow was completely new to me. I knew it existed, but I didn't know. I mean, it's a post-apocalyptic novel written by Leigh Brackett. That's all I knew before we decided we were going to do this book. So I opened the book with wondering how different was it going to be from the rest of her au revoir, and it turns out to be rather different than most of her au revoir, even in voice in some ways.
I think part of the reason this book has not gotten as much attention as a lot of her other works is partly because of her reputation, as Trish, you were saying, as sort of like a queen of space opera. And so naturally the Skaith books, which are sort of like planetary romances, get a lot more attention in that respect. But something that I did see a couple of reviewers sort of mention was that this book comes out 4 years prior to a work that is also post-apocalyptic and is considerably more discussed in its oeuvre, which would be the Canticle for Leibowitz,
Walter F. Miller Jr.
I've not actually read.
You've never read Canticle?
Don't start with me, Paul.
No, I know.
I'm 41 years old.
Yeah, I know. I just thought you would have taught it by now. That's all.
No, yeah. I haven't. I've thought about picking it up to read for that, but I ended up teaching some other stuff. But I think what's really interesting about it is it's part of this 50s, 60s period of nuclear apocalypse type narratives. And the ones we talk about from that period are quite different and from this particular work, in the sense that we don't talk about The Long Tomorrow, and yet in so many ways I found The Long Tomorrow deeply a compelling treatment of a very serious kind of aspect of American culture that weirdly felt very prescient today in a very uncomfortable way. And I would love to see this book get even more attention than just being in a Library of America edition, because I think it is actually, I might teach this book at some point, because it is really, really quite good.
Yeah, it thinks deeply about a lot of things, and the prose is beautiful in a lot of places. The characters are sympathetic, or at least the narrator, Lynn, we hear a lot of what he thinks, and he tells us what some other people think and do, but it's mainly the world as seen through Lynn's
eyes. Yeah.
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 But yeah, there are some just gorgeous passages, and I'll be happy to read a few if we have time at some point.
Because you both know, and most listeners know, I'm all about world building and the way that Brackett builds her post-apocalyptic America and gives us this. that long German word beginning with a B, Bildungsroman of
Bildungsroman, yeah.
Yep, starting from this tiny little village in what was once Eastern Ohio, going going all the way to the secret city and finding the electronic brain, it's a fascinating journey. It's like we get to see these various places. We start off small and slow and see his upbringing and where he came from. We get lots of time at the river town and the conflicts there, and then finally the quote unquote secret city and the secret underneath the mountain that could destroy this post apocalyptic America, or destroy the world if some people have its way. So it's a fascinating journey. It's a coming of age novel as well, because they're both teenager. The characters are both teenagers trying to find their way, not fitting in with their society. Although Lem is conflicted about that at every step. There's a lot of strands that she puts down through this novel that she follows along, then the reader can follow along and enjoy. It's not a simple straight track. It's a braided weave of themes, motifs, and settings for the reader.
Yeah, I would agree that so if you think too deeply about like the world building in this book, you end up in, I think, a place where you've made a mistake. Because if you try to think about like how does the world reach this point in this story, it stops making sense. But if you think about the character level, about who these characters are and the sort of motifs that this story is exploring, in having them go through their journey, as you say, a sort of coming of age story, Paul, which it very much is, I think it's a story that is deeply emotionally engaged and also weirdly feels least like science fiction up until the weird science fiction stuff actually shows up. And it is a thing that even Damon Knight acknowledges in, I think it's In Search of, I can't remember the name of the book now. The book has escaped me, but it's a book about science fiction. And he acknowledges that this is a book that, for much of it, doesn't feel like it has the speculative element of science fiction, because really, other than the thing we're told about how the world has, there's like a nuclear war and everything went to hell in a handbasket, the world is sort of presented simply as is, in a very sort of matter-of-fact, sort of very hyper-realistic way. Certainly alien to our way of living, and it's only much later that it sort of shifts over. I found that very interesting to sort of experience, where I'm so used to science fiction that like announces itself. Like, here's the sci-fi thing. And to me, this doesn't until the sort of, I believe it's Clementine, the sort of AI machine of vac tubes and other kinds of things shows up much, much, much later in the book. Much of this is sort of like about a repressed society, a repressed religious society, and it's grappling with a fallout we don't even see. We just get to see people sort of existing in this. I think that's part of what makes this such an interesting book, is it is not terribly interested in trying to make sense of the reality we're in, where it's trying to like explain like, why does the world like this, and like a lot of grave detail. It's more, these people exist here, they don't have all the answers either, and they're just trying to survive and live and do their normal life stuff in a world that feels alien to us.
Trish?
Yeah, Trish, please.
It does feel alien to us, but I think Brackett does an extraordinary job of portraying some of the positives of this repressive rural religious society, because, you know, there are many books where they just say religious, you know, theocracy bad, let's escape from it and build a new thing. But there are some just beautiful passages about trying to understand. You know, there's a scene where grandmother is saying, "I wish I had it back," said Gran. "I wish I had a red dress, and a TV, and a nice white porcelain toilet, and all the other things. It was a good world. I wish it hadn't ended." "But it did end," said Pa, "and you are a foolish old woman to question the goodness of God. Did any of these things help you to survive? Did they help the people of the cities? Did they? And, he's right. All that fancy technology did not help people survive. There is a reason that it's a theocracy now, because the people who survived were the ones who were living close to the land. But then, so there's her logic, but then there's beauty later. Lynn, after, Dad sends him out to think about what he's done. And he does think, he looks at the land, he sees how beautiful it is. A sense of warmth began to spread all through Lynn, and with it came a passionate, wordless love for this place that he was looking at. The fields and the house, the barn, the rough woods and sky. He understood what Pa meant. It was good, and God was good. He understood what Pa meant about a contented heart. Yeah, so, for those who can find contentment, it's a good way of life. And Lynn very, very nearly decides to stay and, be a contented farmer. And it's only really because his cousin Esau steals a radio and starts fiddling with technology, because Esau really is interested in machines, Lynn ends up getting caught and getting exiled. He was ready, at that point to turn his back on the temptations of knowledge.
Well, he exiles himself. He voluntarily leaves, I think is more accurate. I think the thing that ultimately breaks it for him is realizing that he asks these questions that nobody else in his community will entertain. And if you try to seek the answers yourself, they will violently beat it out of you. Mm-hmm. They will destroy you physically to the point that you will give in out of fear that you might be beaten again. Because that's what happens to Esau, right? He is violently, horrendously beaten by his father. And then Len's own father, violently beats him while sitting there apologizing that he has to do it. The whole time, nobody seems willing to sort of talk to him about, what he's feeling. They just tell him, don't have those feelings, don't think about those things. That's forbidden. It's not right. And as we see much later in the story, there's this moment when they're in refuge where I think it's Mike, the guy who's building the warehouse, who's sort of giving this impassioned speech. And the thing that he points out is the people in charge of this new nation, such as it were, are religious extremists who will violently crack down on you if you try to push against its edicts. And so in some way, he uses the language of sort of being enslaved to their way of life. But he correctly points out, their way of life does not allow any other way of life.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you try to do it...
Yeah.
Brackett is not arguing in favor of, ignorant ruralism, but she gives a sympathy to that point of view that I rarely see. I think it's kind of a way into the book for some people.
She's interesting. I did not find it
she's sympathetic to all. She's sympathetic to the people that accept that limited life, not the repressors, but people like his father. As almost Lem comes herself, she's sympathetic to the pastoralists, and at least in the main, not the agents of that are trying to keep
not
the
religious extremists,
not the extremists, but those who live under it. So there's a real sympathy for. The people who have to live in this society and accept it. I mean, it's but again, this society has the dandelion problem. You try to poke your head up, and this society will cut you down. See Esau, see the warehouse, see our city underneath the mountain with the electronic brain trying to find the answer to creating a force field to stop atomic bombs.
I think this is where the present conditions have maybe soured my ability to find that sympathy.
Yeah.
And so for me, I did not find them sympathetic. I found them pathetic in some cases at best. and monstrous in other situations.
I read this before
that,
the event that you're alluding to. Yeah.
What? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I read this
that.
before the event that you're alluding to. That might had I read this after that event, maybe I would feel differently now.
Because it's really appropriate. Yeah. Because it's really appropriate, I now want to read the full quote that I took the tagline from.
Sure.
Okay.
I know now what lies across the land, the slow and heavy weight. They call it faith, but it is not faith, it is fear. The people have clapped a shelter over their heads, a necessity of ignorance, a passion of retreat, and they have called it God and worshipped it, and it is false as any Malach, and it will betray its worshippers, leaving them defenseless in the face of a tomorrow that will surely come. It may be a slow coming and a long one, but come it will, and all their desperation will not stop it. Nothing will stop it. So I don't think the book ever says the phrase, the long tomorrow, but I think that's what it's talking about. Tomorrow is coming, even if it takes a long time to get here.
Well, in some ways, it sort of draws an irony to that original quote from Pa, where he's talking to the grandma and saying, like, what did all those skills prepare them for? Well, what are all of the skills you are now are going to prepare you for the technological future that's going to come? Because when it comes, I mean, what skill sets do you really have at this point to handle this? Your way of life can't really exist in the same way anymore. We end up with perhaps some version of the world we are in now, where you do have a variation of, the Mennonites and the Amish who exist, but are not in any way a political factor.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that the Mennonites and the Amish triumph over all in this book. Which is not what I didn't see that coming. It's like, that's where the religious power comes from. It makes sense in the retrospect, but
as opposed to no, I can't think of it. The book that came out 5 years later, the Canticle for Leibowitz, which had a totally different religious cult that grew and took power.
In some ways, less. What's what I'm looking for? Less ambitiously speculative, because Lewis says, "Oh, the Catholic Church will just rise again. It'll be just like after the fall of Rome," which is a possibility. But Leigh Brackett's answer is more interesting in some ways. Like, no, a homegrown American rural, religiously intolerant rural homegrown society takes over. Is there even Catholicism? I mean, the presence of other religions in this book is not discussed, which I wondered, are there any people who are Jewish in this world, or at least in America? I wondered.
The only thing we really get is that there are different sort of sects at different levels of, I'll use the term very loosely, liberalism, right? Going down a scale, which, Refuge has its own variation, but even they don't seem to be able to push the line too far. Mm-hmm. They can only take it so far before, the Judge Taylor at one point just basically makes a pact that ultimately backfires on him. Where it just leads to violence, and they essentially destroy Refuge.
Right, but I mean, it's interesting that Refuge is having this issue, and there's the community across the river. So even if the warehouse had not been built to cause the death of Refuge, as you were saying, Chris, the long tomorrow is coming, whether they like it or not. Populations are increasing. Technology is going to find a way into people's lives, whether they like it or not, or darkly. Yeah. If it's not from within, it'll come from without. The entire world hasn't gone rural. We don't. I mean, there's some very vague things like what happens to the rest of the world, but eventually technology will come, because that's kind of human nature, to poke, to prod, and to adapt to circumstances. I mean, in the history of humanity, yes, we've lost many times. We've lost technology. We've gone to simpler ways of life. Call it dark ages, call it bright ages, whatever you want to call it. But humans tend to not stay in a simple technological level worldwide. I mean, there are some societies which have worked perfectly that way, but generally, especially when they're in conflict with others, technology is the handmaiden of conflict with other societies.
Good reference, Paul. I mean, yeah, you're correct, right? That this is, the sort of thematic of the story is, ironically, it is another kind of apocalypse that is coming. It is just one that is, we would welcome us. We would be like, oh, new technology, great, like it's going to make the world better. But these individuals, most everyone we needed this story would view it as a very terrifying thing. And to some degree,
and try to stop it by any means they can. Yes,
by any means necessary. There's some criticism I saw, I think in Brackett, of this book, of like, how is it that all of this world has collapsed in 2 generations? That, the roads are gone and like all of this, they've lost all of their knowledge of the world and everything. And I'm like, well, I think like what the book is trying to get across is that whatever happened when the world fell apart, the nukes were hitting the cities, right? They became the target. Probably billions of people are dying, right? It is a horrifying spectacle. And people fell into the fear. And frankly, fear is not a terribly rational thing. They went, look, city bad. Mm-hmm. So we're going to retreat back to a more minimalist lifestyle. And we're going to shun the city outright. They witnessed an apocalypse, right? Literally, like, witnessed the apocalypse of the world, and now they have retreated. They're going to face a new kind, one that also disrupts their life, just perhaps one that is not the kind of quick burn fire of a nuke. And understandably, they're afraid of that too, because from their perspective, the last time we went down this path, humanity almost was wiped out. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe I'm a little wrong. Maybe there's a little sympathy because like they're all like about to poop their britches, right? With this idea that if they start having steamships or heavens to Betsy, that Clementine is let out, it might lead to some really horrible consequences. Unfortunately, it just means like what you end up with instead is not a society that finds a better way forward, that does not repeat those problems. You end up with a society that represses itself, which is what we're shown so much through this book. It's varying levels of repression. Even Bartertown is effectively repressed. Right,
because it has this big secret. Anybody who lives there is not allowed to leave. There are a few only men, who are allowed to leave and become traders. But
I was waiting for you to make that adjustment.
But for everyone else, they're told, if you try to leave, you'll be killed. And that's just the deal. And there are a lot of harsh deals in this world. Going back to just for another minute to the religious fanaticism, the devotion of the people serving the electronic brain, it comes in very much as a religion of its own for these people.
Oh, definitely.
They call it, faith in technology, but it is faith. They are having faith and acting in faith that someday Clementine, the positronic brain, will come up with a solution that suppresses atomic atom splitting, and therefore there won't be any bombs, and therefore it'll be safe to go back to technology and we can all have nice lives again. But it's a faith in this thing. None of the people now working on the machine are from the old days. None of them really understand what they're doing that well. They're just trying to feed equations into this machine to give it more information, to let it do its magic, essentially, and create shields against atom bombs. So yeah, in that way, it's just another kind of religion.
Is it specifically atom bombs or splitting of atoms specifically?
Splitting of atoms. So nuclear power would also be forbidden, which means that Barterstown would not have its secret nuclear power plant either.
Yes.
Which it's weird. The solution requires a technology that they will then have to destroy.
Yes.
That's good. That's good. A little bit of irony in there. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's like they're kind of skating on thin edge because they don't know what they're doing. And it's like they're kind of ticking over this nuclear power plant and this supercomputer, not really understanding what they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just feeding in more answers and hoping, trial and error. And someday they think Clementine will spit out the answer that saves them all.
Instead, it's more like a chat GPT where they're spitting out stuff and Clementine is spitting out stuff that is word-shaped answers but may not actually have any relation to reality.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a little unfair to Clementine. I feel like Clementine's at least semi-useful.
Mm-hmm.
A little more directed, Paul. Be nice to Clementine. You apologize right now.
Apparently, I've not been nice tonight, according to the chat. So, the chat says I've not been nice. So, apparently, I'm grumpy, Paul, today.
I do like that the story, though, deals with when Len finds out about all this nuclear power and other technology, that he's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's very realistic.
Yes, that was
once,
kind of
once he finds the secret,
idea.
It's like
it's great to see that. I think like a writer that was less interested in like the culture of that he comes from would have just sort of like he just changes everything's changed. He's fine with it. To not forget that where he comes from, he's going to have a lot of ingrained belief that's like deep embedded, and just existing outside of his home culture isn't enough that it's just going to dissipate, right? Those things, he's going to have reactions that are like he was taught his whole life, this bad, this is bad, this is bad. And so to see him react that way, I felt was the writer really, really hitting the mark.
Yeah.
Although it did, yeah. Please, Paul. Please jump in.
Okay. I will jump in. So in a sense we have a number of different faiths, as it were, in this book, and they're all kind of working blind and kind of following the worm trails of their own past without actually thinking to break out to the future. I mean, the people of Barterstown and their computers, they're feeding in these equations in the hope that they'll get that one answer. I mean, you have a supercomputer on your hands. Yes, it's a limited supercomputer, but still a supercomputer. There are a lot of potential things and problems you could use the supercomputer for. I mean, they said like, oh, this is the pressing problem. You need to be able to solve the nuclear bomb problem, or we're just going back to where it is. But there's a lot between where they are now and nuclear weapons. They could use the supercomputer for more constructive purposes, but they don't even think to, because it's almost like a dogmatic religion that they have to solve this problem of nuclear bombs. So they waste their resources as much as the religious fanatics waste the resources of people who aren't just content to push a plow. Mm. And it's a tragedy on both sides. It's a tragedy for both ends. It's like they're all differently blind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, eventually, the circumstances are going to have a breakthrough, because that long tomorrow will come. But it's going to be a painful process, because nobody is actually trying to organizingly prepare for that tomorrow in a real and sustainably logical way.
It does make you wonder whether or not, when that tomorrow begins to truly arise and becomes, like a cascade, right? These different subcultures that exist, they are diametrically opposed to each other. In some cases, quite violently so.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, doesn't, breed a culture of cooperation or, frankly, accommodation, where you might just say, okay, well, you go live your way over there and we'll live our way over here and everybody would be fine. That means part of that that future that's being built is going to be more violent conflict.
Yes.
And when technology builds that up, right, are we not just getting cycles now? Are we just not getting a repetition of the cycle where humanity nearly kills itself off again, and like just repeat this process because everybody hasn't figured out, like, we have all these different ways of living our lives, but we haven't figured out how to live together.
There's got to be a middle way between the society that blew itself up and just two repressive societies, one based on just keeping technology down and out, and one kind of holding husband its knowledge and not allowing any sort of deviance of thought.
Well, it doesn't really come up in this book, but as cycles of civilization and ruralization and repression keep going through, eventually, it'll be much, much harder for technological civilizations to rise because of all the shallow mining having been done. And people who actually want to make things out of metal are going to have to dig a lot deeper.
Using old metal. I mean, the exhaustion of easy access to oil without high technology. There are a number. I know we're not up to copy, but I can think of a number of post-apocalyptic stories which have at least thought about those problems. But for This America to Rise again, they're going to find it. They're going to find it difficult to build their civilization on our bones. It's a challenge. And it's going to shape. Now I'm thinking speculative. I mean, Brackett doesn't think about this, but as a science fiction writer, think about it. It's going to, once this new civilization, which eventually will come, rises, it's going to be really shaped by those limitations and the necessities of having to build from the bones of the old in a way that, I mean, even thinking of post another apocalypse, post-Western Roman Empire and, the various kingdoms of Western Europe reusing building material from crumbling Roman ruins. And even there's still plenty of mines and other stuff they could mine. The Roman Empire didn't completely devastate Western Europe, but they still reused that stuff. And but this society has it much worse, as you point out, Trish, because there's a lot less new stuff to find. I mean, in terms of geologic time, in tens of millions of years, that problem will be solved. But they don't have tens of millions of years to wait for new deposits to come up due to volcanic action.
Well, now I'm thinking of Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang.
Yes.
Where you have another post-nuclear apocalyptic situation. And, people are scavenging tech and materials from the cities. But, nobody's, as far as I remember, nobody's talking about starting up new mines or anything like that. And there are many other issues addressed in that book.
Or how about Walk to the End of the World?
Sure.
By Susie McKee Charnas, which we did on a previous episode. Another post-apocalyptic society that's and one that's kind of pushed back, came back, but now bumping hard against resource limitations.
Well, since you mentioned Walk to the End of the World, and that book focused a lot on a future complete repression of women and toxic male patriarchy. I do want to just mention, this book has two women in it. Well, okay, it also has Gran and Len's ma, but mainly the two women are the two ones who
Joan and
end up
Amity.
becoming wives, right? Amity hooks up with Esau because she wants to escape refuge, and Joan, basically seduces Len because she wants to escape Barterstown. And it's it's sad but believable in this world building. Sorry. excuse me. It's sad but believable in this world building that the only way that these women can even conceive of moving towards the lives that they want is to find men who will take them in that direction. You know, there is no role in this city for women to strike out and work on their own. It's all very, family, rural, patriarchal, and men are the only ones who have professions as such. So it's interesting, Leigh Brackett wrote much in her time. She did in her space operas. She had some strong female characters, but the ones that I can think of were foils for the men, not, protagonists of their own. I may have missed something, but, it's just, maybe she was just writing for the markets that, she thought she could sell in. But I do think it's a little sad that such a notable female writer of science fiction, her women are basically footnotes and trophies.
I think in this book, as you've correctly noted, it makes the most sense because it is culturally interwoven. As you were mentioning Amity and Joan, the thing that really stood out to me was the other handful of women were presented, especially Amity's mother, who's really not in this very much, but is presented not even like she's quite human, almost like she's like a doll or a robot that
a Stepford wife.
A Stepford wife,
kind of like a Stepford wife, not quite fully a person who just sort of exists in Judge Taylor's house and does housewife activities, but lacks any of the sort of normal human components that we get with, like, Grandma, for example, who also isn't in this terribly long, who is very impassioned and has strong opinions, and everyone just kind of humors her because basically she's old, and they're just like, you just gotta let her have her moment because, like, whatever, it's Grandma. So women are either dismissed because they're old, or there's some excuse they come up with to dismiss them, or they're sort of like these shadow creatures that sort of exist in the story, or they're women who are just doing anything they can to get away from whatever situation they are in that they don't want to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
The thing about Grandma is, this is her one impassioned moment in a long life of having to keep her mouth shut to survive. I forget the exact words, but, she had her life as a little girl in the cities, and then they had to escape, and the only way they could be fed was to agree to convert to this way of life. And
this religion, this patriarchal parochialism. There.
Right. And Lynn has to coax her and coax her and coax her to get her going about the old days. And then as soon as Pa hears, he yells at her, he tells her she's wrong to feel the way that she feels, and she ends up turning her head away and mumbling. And so, Grandma remembers, but, boy, she's had a hard life.
Despite there not really being a lot of very well-developed female characters, I mean, it's mostly really about Len, right? And so it kind of makes sense. But I think we get enough in this story to just think about how deeply interwoven this patriarchy is at multiple different cultural levels. And I'm kind of curious why there's not a lot of academic writing on this book. There's one essay that's in extrapolation that I wasn't able to get access to that sort of talks about its critique of, like, Thoreauism and ruralism and some other ideas, but that was like on the first page and I didn't get to see what the argument was. But it's so weird to me that this isn't really talked about nearly that much, because to me it's such a rich site for a feminist interpretation of how patriarchy is sort of interwoven and sort of like deeply embedded into a culture so much that women actually become, in many respects, either not quite human or sort of forced to make drastic decisions and sacrifice their own agency for whatever desire they may have.
Yeah.
Because this story does it really, really well. And in ways that I found a little bit unsettling at times. So A+, Leigh Brackett. Or F-, depending on your perspective, I guess, because it's not comfortable.
No, she's not condoning or giving the thumbs up to the patriarchy of this post-apocalyptic America, but her mirror, her lens is unsettlingly clear and crystal clear on what it'd be like. I mean, I could buy the world of this 30th Amendment of this Amish, these patriarchal Amish uber alles sort of America. It feels. I mean, I go back to Oberlin. I feel like I could live here. I wouldn't want to live here by any standard whatsoever. But it feels enough that this is how it could go, and it would not be good.
Can I ask a weird question? Because this is at the beginning, right? The 30th Amendment, which is like no cities are basically allowed. There's like a limit to like how
1,000
many places
people.
you can. Yeah. And so naturally this creates some minor conflict because, once a town grows big enough, your kids just have to leave. Like they're not allowed to stick because there's nowhere for them to live, right? But one of the interesting things it made me think of is Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, which has like the 211th, 212th, and 213th in like the first section. And obviously 30th is comparatively much more reasonable.
Yeah, right.
So,
it's 200 amendments.
Vonnegut's not being serious. Like, of course, we're not going to have 200-something amendments by like the 1970s
but
or whatever.
The story is satire. So so
right.
he pulls a number out of his rear. But
I guess my question is, I can only access this period from like distant memory, reading history. If you ask me now, do I think we could get to a 30th Amendment? Right? I don't even think we can get whatever the next one is at this point, because to me, the political divide is so extreme that I cannot imagine an amendment to the Constitution right now. I don't even know how that would be possible. But like, this is 1955, imagining, some future moment or whatever. Do you have any sense that from your own memory of maybe how your parents talked about this period or other siblings, that there was more of a potential political will?
Yes. But not this period, but more up to the 1970s. I think the high water mark for changing the Constitution and trying to improve it was probably the failure of the ERA. The ERA being the Equal Rights Amendment, and the push for that, and its ultimate failure thanks to that witch of a woman, Phyllis Schlafly, in killing. I think that was the end of the momentum for the political will to get a coalition to actually get amendments. But until then, I mean, it was like, when we wanted to, America, especially like in the first half of the 20th century, we added a whole bunch of amendments. I mean, we had an amendment to ban alcohol, and then had another amendment again to reverse that. So that sort of political will did once exist, but I think the ERA was the end of that era, and it being killed has kind of. I mean, I know there was another amendment that accidentally got put in, that accidentally got ratified afterwards about congressional pay, but yeah, I don't think there's a political appetite now anymore. But there used to be. So I could see them counting up to 30, making that a reasonable number. Also makes me wonder what are the other amendments up to 30 that she had in this world? Yeah. Are they post-apocalyptic or not?
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't necessarily have to be. Yeah, they wouldn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, I do like that just little element of world building. She didn't call it the 27th or 8th Amendment. She put a few more in there for safety to imply that the world has moved on.
But this whole discussion makes me think of a different post-apocalyptic story set in America called The Election by Robert Silverberg. Have either of you read it?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so it's after a nuclear war, and the United States is trying to rebuild itself. At least a portion of the United States is trying to rebuild itself, and the I believe it's the state of Tennessee, and they go into Kentucky, or is it Kentucky to Ohio? Anyway, it's Kentucky, and they go into Ohio, and they're horrified by the regression of American society and American intellectualism, because the people are afraid that these people from Kentucky are going to spray atoms at them. And then we wind up meeting someone who basically runs this little section of Ohio, and he doesn't want the new federal government. They're like, what the hell do we want you for? I'm running this just fine. Go away. And our hero, who's a representative of the new federal government in Kentucky, is like horrified that this kind of this backwards shift that America has taken, and the ignorance and superstition and the lack of social cohesion. It's like, why wouldn't you want to join America, join the new America? And that story has always haunted me and disheartened me. The spray atoms out of this is like, oh God, it's terrible. I mean, years later when I watched Interstellar, and they were teaching wrong, and no one wanted on the moon, I thought of that story. It's like, oh God, yeah, I get it now.
So we're running out of time, and so I want to give everybody one last chance to have a thought, because we can't do a 2-hour episode.
Alas.
Not least of all because I'll get yelled at. So does anyone have any last things they'd really want to talk about? I know there's some notes in our script that are thinking about its place in genre and so on, which I think we've somewhat covered.
Yeah.
There's a note in here about the prose,
which I've read several quotes and will happily read more, but I know we have to stop sometime.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I guess we could go with general reactions. I could just say that this might be my favorite of the books we've covered for this feature so far.
Cool.
I found it very immersive, and I didn't really want to put it down. I was really enjoying the reading process with this one, which has not been easy because I've been super freaking busy and, exhausted and burnt out. So this was nice. I mean, to be fair, this thing helped because, gosh, it's pretty. And
Nice.
God.
I have book envy at this moment.
Yeah, it's so pretty. It's very pretty. I just found there was a real depth to the writing that I really enjoyed, and I loved the exploration of Len, and I loved all of the weird ways that I started to wonder what literary references were here, because I kept thinking at one point definitely some like Huckleberry Finn moments, a few parts, the sort of descent down the river moments, and there were some others that I was thinking of. I just found it very engaging, and I think it is a shame that this is a book that qualifies for this feature, because this should be a more widespread.
In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to discuss this book here. It's like everyone knows A Long Tomorrow. Sadly and tragically, that is not true. Yes, I mean, I've read plenty of Brackett's planetary romance and space operas. It's like, so this was an interesting new strand of her writing I had not been exposed to before. So I really value, adding this to the quiver of her war. It makes me sadder that more people don't talk about Leigh Brackett now, because look what she can do. Look.
I'm very pleased to have been discussing a book by Leigh Brackett, and in particular this book by Leigh Brackett. Her planetary romances are fun, but this is so deep and intriguing and thoughtful. I really think it's worth anybody's time.
Agree. We have one quick question. Chocolate.
Chocolate rabbits. No wonder the world fell, says Paul.
That's right.
Chocolate rabbits.
Yeah, that kind of broke my heart.
Decadent cities, yes.
Decadent cities. I love how it says we could talk endlessly about the state of the U.S. city in the 1950s, but whatever.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast in itself, Sean.
It is.
Yes, it is. There's a quick question in chat that Paul will ask you to answer relatively quickly. Remember Warrior wants to know the question is, where did you hear about Phyllis Schlafly?
Somewhere in politics, I heard about her and her activism in trying to stop the ERA. I don't think it was from Harlan Ellison, as Rainbow Warrior suggests. It just came across in
She was in
political
all the
reading.
newspapers and magazines growing up.
Yeah,
Had spots on TV. She was very much a presence if you were around at that time.
A negative presence, in my opinion.
I agree.
So,
okay, well, we got to close out the show. So, folks, that is Mining the Genre Asteroid. So if you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, or you'd like to suggest a work, we're always on the lookout for stuff that maybe has flown under the radar. Pre-1980 is our rule, but from there it can go pretty much any direction. So if there's something you really think we should talk about that you think is an interesting work, please suggest them. You can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com, or you can go to the listener suggestions page, which is skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. We are Skiffy and Fanty basically everywhere that exists: Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, Mastodon, all of those things. We're easy enough to find. We also have a Patreon and a newsletter run by Stephen Geigen Miller. The Patreon is run by whoever happens to be allowed in there at any given moment. Currently, it's my cat. So there you go.
that explains a
you
lot.
can find all of that stuff on our link tree, which is linktr.ee/skiffyandfanty. I am also on the internet. Alphabet Streams is where Skiffy and Fanty goes. So if you go to twitch.tv/alphabetstreams, you'll find Skiffy and Fanty every Friday at 7 p.m. Central. I am there eventually to start streaming again. I have a Patreon, I have socials, all that stuff. My link tree is /Sean Duke. I'm easy enough to find. Go follow me.
Oh, you can find me, Trish, on Blue Sky at PE Matson, on Mastodon at newsy.social at Trisha Yim, on my blog at whatsthewordnow.blogspot.com, and I also write reviews at the Skiffy and Fanty blog.
Pretty damn fine reviews, if I do say so myself.
I agree.
Me, I can be found rocketing across the internet as Prince Justin, from book reviews to podcasting to streaming to sharing more photography than is healthy. And a lot more.
I don't know that I would say than is healthy. I feel like you share a fairly reasonable amount.
Maybe.
Do you sleep at least 6 to 7 hours a night, Paul?
I try.
Okay, yeah, I mean, like, do you eat food still?
Yes, I have food.
Okay, you got 3 square?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
Doesn't always happen.
You get enough water?
Yes, Sean.
Okay. Then I don't think it's beyond reason. I think if your health was declining because you're doing too much, we might have problems, Paul.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Well, this is awkward. You made it as awkward as it is.
Yes. I was going to say, that's sufficiently awkward, and that is the kind of awkward I'm willing to do, because I'm pretty sure we'll have to have a conversation if I do something relevant to the book. And I don't know that we need to have that conversation, so why don't we call it there? So on that note, awkward ending and scene.
Take care of yourselves and each other.
Stay frosty, because the spice must flow.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.